This is VOA Africa.
Good evening. I'm Esther Gidhu-Ewart. It's Thursday, December 19th. This is Africa 54. The Democratic-majority U.S. House of Representatives votes to impeach President Donald Trump. We'll have an in-depth report on the historic event and what's next for the president and America's citizens. A European Union-sponsored project is trying to reduce the number of Malawians leaving the country for prospects of better jobs abroad. And Boeing confirms it will suspend production of its 737 MAX jetliner in January. We'll have more on the potential impact of this move. We begin our broadcast tonight with history being made in the United States. The Democratic-majority U.S. House of Representatives voted to impeach President Donald Trump Wednesday night. Lawmakers passed charges he abused the power of the presidency to benefit himself politically by a 230 to 197 vote with one present. Charges Trump obstructed Congress' efforts to investigate him also passed by 229 to 198 votes with one present. The historic vote fell almost entirely along party lines. VOA congressional correspondent Catherine Gibson has more on the historic day from Capitol Hill.
Donald Trump, now the third president in 230 years of U.S. history to be impeached by the U.S. House of Representatives. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi warning Democrats not to cheer the historic moment. After acknowledging the seriousness of the vote earlier.
It is tragic that the president's reckless actions make impeachment necessary. He gave us no choice.
The vote ends the House's divisive three-month investigation into the president that began with a whistleblower complaint alleging Trump held up nearly $400 million in congressionally approved military aid to Ukraine in return for a personal political favor from Ukraine's leader. To investigate political rival Joe Biden and his son Hunter, a move Democrats said endangered American democracy.
In America, no one is above the law. Donald J. Trump sacrificed our national security in an effort to cheat in the next election. And for that and his continued efforts to seek foreign interference in our elections, he must be impeached.
Speaking as lawmakers impeached him, Trump said the vote would ruin Democrats' political fortunes instead of his.
With today's illegal, unconstitutional, and partisan impeachment, the do-nothing Democrats, and they are do-nothing. All they want to do is focus on this. What they could be doing are declaring their deep hatred and disdain for the American voter. This lawless partisan impeachment is a political suicide march for the Democrat Party.
Every single House Republican remained loyal to the president, arguing Democrats were trying to invalidate the results of the 2016 election.
They can't actually pin anything of factual basis on him. The president did nothing wrong in this issue.
Polls show lawmakers aren't the only ones divided. Around 43% of the American public supports Trump, while around half of the American public supports impeachment.
That is a significant change from the last impeachment that we had. What it doesn't mean is that Trump's presidency will end early. We are so partisan now in the United States, and our polarization by party is so intense that really impeachment is not even a power anymore. It doesn't work.
But the historic vote does place Trump in a small group of U.S. presidents forever remembered for facing the ultimate disapproval of lawmakers. While Democrats' passage of articles of impeachment requires a trial of Trump in the Republican-majority Senate early next year, he will almost certainly be acquitted and stay in office.
Republicans were never going to expel Trump. But it's a warning to President Trump whether he serves 1 more year as president or 5 more years as president, it's going to remind him of what can happen when you go too far.
Despite the expectation Trump will remain in office, impeachment is a rare moment in U.S. political history and now a permanent mark on the record of President Trump. Catherine Gibson, VOA News, Capitol Hill.
Now, to deep dive into what the impeachment of President Trump means to him and his legacy, what it means for the country, and the next steps in this historic process, I'm joined by VOA's News Center executive producer, Steve Reddish. Steve, help our viewers understand what this all means for everyone involved in this deeply partisan, discussion, inquiry.
It means that the president has been impeached. The Congress has said what you did, what we think you did, does not comport. It's a two-step process for impeachment. And he is impeached. No matter what the Senate does, no matter what happens further, he has been impeached by the House of Representatives. Now, the Senate must decide whether or not to remove him from office.
So walk us through the next process, the trial.
So what happens next is that Nancy Pelosi, you saw her on the report before, she and her advisors need to determine who's going to prosecute this case in the Senate. And once that decision is made, then they take the articles of impeachment, the 2 votes that they had, all the paperwork, and bring them over to the Senate. And then the Senate makes the decision. The Senate accepts them and then holds a trial. How that trial is going to play out is really going to be up to the Senate majority leader, a guy named Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, a Republican. And so far, he says he's going to hold a trial, but he is also working with the White House and how to put that trial together.
Help our viewers understand what it takes for the president now to be removed.
There's 100 members of the Senate. The Constitution requires 2/3 of those senators vote to convict, vote guilty. The Senate is made up of 53 Republicans and 45 Democrats and 2 independents. So the Republicans have the majority, and there aren't going to be 20 senators who are going to go over to the Democrats and vote to convict.
So meaning he is likely?
He is likely to stay in office, meaning that there will be a trial, and the Democrats from the House will do their best to persuade the senators to vote their way. But the politics of it all says it's going to end up acquitting the president, and he will probably say exonerating the president.
Well, either way, removing or exonerating him. What comes next? Where does the Chief Justice come in?
The Chief Justice presides over the trial. He's basically a referee. The Chief Justice is going to make ruling on motions. He'll say what is admissible, what isn't admissible. But also, if he makes a ruling, there's a member of the Senate who can stand up and say, I object, and call for a vote. And then the Senate will vote on whether or not to uphold or not uphold what the Chief Justice has done.
Now, Steve, so when does the trial begin? If you can explain to us, because it's being reported that there might be a delay, and what would this mean?
Right now, there is a report. There are lots of reports that Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker, is going to delay bringing those articles of impeachment over to the Senate until she sees that the Senate will hold what she believes is a fairer trial. A lot of the politics will play out on this. The House does not have to send the articles of impeachment to the Senate. That has been customary, but it's not required. So basically, the Senate trial wouldn't start until the first couple of weeks of January, no matter what, because of how the holidays are falling. It could be a little later in January. Or it could be not at all.
Wow. So there's no mandatory requirement that they have to move, or she has to move on with this?
If the House sends those articles of impeachment to the Senate, then the Senate must hold a trial. But if the House does not send them, then the Senate has nothing to act on.
Well, very briefly, Steve, what does this mean for American voters who are right now very confused?
They'll probably stay confused. Impeachment is a little bit of an arcane process, but the country, the polls show the country is split on this issue. I don't see the country coming together on this issue. It will stay split, and in 11 months we'll have another election, and we'll see what happens at that other election.
Steve, thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
your excellent insight into this.
Thank you.
Well, Steve Reddish is a VOA's News Center executive producer. Now, as we mentioned earlier, members of the House of Representatives voted Wednesday to charge President Donald Trump with 2 articles of impeachment as the U.S. Senate prepares to address the issue in the new year. Public opinion on the impeachment remains polarized. VOA's Adita Dulinari looks at the factors feeding a deep partisan divide.
The impeachment of President Donald Trump has energized people across the political spectrum, including visitors outside the Capitol.
This man constantly lies, breaks the law, violates every constitutional thing there is. He cheated with Vladimir Putin to steal the first election, and he's trying to cheat for the second one.
Peggy Williams says she joined protesters outside the Capitol to voice concern about the state of American democracy.
When members of the Senate and members of the House refuse to allow the facts, the true stories, to be revealed and to respond to those, we are in a crisis. It's a constitutional crisis, but it's really a crisis of democracy.
The president's defenders are just as vocal.
There haven't been no facts. It's only hearsay and innuendo.
Mark Kempf says the president is being targeted by a politically motivated process.
I think it's really an invalid impeachment, and there's no real logical basis, especially relative to what's required under the Constitution to remove a president.
This deep divide is reflected in opinion polls, which show that the American public remains split over impeachment. Some on both sides see the media as a factor in deepening political divisions.
If I watch CNN or MSNBC, I get a very different story than if I watch Fox News.
The media over the last couple years has divided America by race, by gender, by ethnicity, by everything you can think of.
While Americans have been divided for years, analyst Elaine Kmark says Trump exploits those divisions as a political strategy.
It's long-standing, and then Donald Trump has taken it to new heights with the way he's conducted the presidency.
President Donald Trump is expected to survive a trial to remove him from office in the Republican-controlled Senate. But supporters of the impeachment process don't seem disheartened.
They got to do their job. They swore an oath to uphold the Constitution. The man broke the law. This has nothing to do with the election. This is the law.
Analyst Kmark says that while divisive, the process has helped to strengthen American democracy.
The most important reason to do this is to preserve what we call in the United States the separation of powers.
The process has also energized the political base of both parties. Analysts like Kmark expect to see in the 2020 elections the highest turnout ever in American history. Adita Dunelari, VOA News, Washington.
Thank you, Adita. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also, check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, 7 U.S. Democratic presidential candidates hold their final debate on Thursday night, offering themselves to U.S. voters as alternative in the 2020 U.S. election to President Trump. You're watching Africa54, and we'll be right back. 7 U.S. Democratic presidential candidates are debating again Thursday, presenting themselves to U.S. voters as alternative in the next year's election to President Trump, who was impeached on Wednesday, but unmoved in his quest for a second term in the White House. For more on what to expect from tonight's debate, Associated Press reporter Philip Crowther joins me live from Los Angeles. Philip, welcome back to Africa 54.
Great to be with you.
So how big an impact will the impeachment of Trump have on tonight's debate?
Well, look, it'll be discussed. There is absolutely no doubt about that. And maybe the first thing we should say is that those 7 candidates that we will see on stage tonight here in Los Angeles, and that is a much smaller field than we've seen in the past, they have all come out for the impeachment of President Donald Trump. In fact, they have all applauded the decision by Democrats in the House of Representatives, and they've applauded those 2 final impeachment votes on 2 articles of impeachment last night in the House of Representatives. So all the way from the current frontrunner, former Vice President Joe Biden, to Bernie Sanders, Senator from Vermont, Elizabeth Warren, the Senator from Massachusetts, Pete Buttigieg, the Mayor of South Bend, all of them are for the impeachment of the president. Also, you will see on stage one gentleman, a billionaire, Tom Steyer, who actually made himself pretty famous in political circles by calling for the impeachment of Donald Trump very, very early on. Now, despite the fact that you will see that unity on stage from Democratic presidential candidates, you will also see them probably wanting to move on to other things, because remember that a lot of the oxygen has been pulled out of this political debate over the last few weeks and months. It's the impeachment that has dominated the headlines, and we've almost forgotten about these many Democratic presidential candidates that are still out there, and 7 of which who will be on stage here in Los Angeles a little bit later today.
Well, Philip, right on. 7 now. We had more than 20 just a few months ago. Are the Democrats inching closer to getting a nominee?
Yeah, we're getting that little bit closer. The first voting contest, the Iowa caucuses, they're just 50 days away now. And you might remember just a few months ago, we were talking together from other areas of the United States. Detroit, for example, where there were 2 debates, one after another, 2 nights in a row, 10 candidates on stage each night. That is how many candidates were able to qualify for that debate back in the day. Now we're just down to 7. That doesn't mean, by the way, that only 7 candidates remain in the race. There are plenty more. They simply did not get enough in the polling averages, and they weren't able to fundraise enough to be able to get on this stage. So you're going to see a much smaller field this time around. Some big candidates who we thought might have stayed in this race a little bit longer, the likes of Senator Kamala Harris from her home state of California. She dropped out of the race and won't be on stage here tonight, which, by the way, has led to quite a bit of criticism of this Democratic field that you'll see on stage tonight. It won't be as diverse as some of those groups of candidates that you've seen over the last few months. Only Andrew Yang, the businessman, is an Asian American, and otherwise it's an all-white Democratic presidential field. That is very different to what we saw at the very start of this Democratic presidential race, with the most diverse field there has ever been.
Now, Philip, hopefully tomorrow you give us another update and tell us what people in California, especially the voters there, want to hear and what they really expect, aside from all the politicking we're seeing. Philip, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
Philip Crowther is an international reporter with the Associated Press Global Media Services. Now to Africa, where the number of Malawian migrant workers in South Africa is estimated at 100,000 or more. They are driven there by low incomes at home and the prospect of better jobs abroad. A European Union-sponsored project is now trying to reduce the number of Malawians leaving the country by offering job training for self-employment. Lamek Messina reports from Blantyre.
After years of struggling to feed his family, Taylor Jeffrey Panga went to South Africa in 2012 in search of better paid work. But like many Malawian migrant workers, his 5-year stay in Johannesburg did not go as well as he had hoped.
Kwa chaka choyamba ndi chachitatuchi.
For the first 3 years, my working pattern was on and off. I couldn't find a proper job. Things did not work as expected.
In 2016, Panga's employers at a state high school found out he was undocumented and fired him along with 6 other illegal Malawians working as cleaners. Instead of struggling for work in South Africa, he returned home and started his own business thanks to a project run by the International Organization for Migration.
The target is for 500 Malawi nationals to be received back home. At the moment, we've received 426, and we've been able to assist 241 with their livelihood projects.
The European Union funded project helps migrant workers stranded in South Africa return home and get job training in poultry farming and other trades. The project helped Panga open a tailoring shop in Blantyre, where he also trains others.
I don't have plans to migrate. That's why I'm making sure to find a means to earn a living. This is because the owner of the place has been there, so he tells us about the good and bad of going abroad.
Xenophobic attacks this year in South Africa spurred some Malawians to return home, but an estimated 100,000 or more are still working in the country. Despite steady economic growth, Malawi remains one of the world's poorest countries, with about 80% of people limited to working on farms.
You know, there is the problem of unemployment. It's everywhere, but back in Malawi, we still have a lot of youth, even graduates from colleges. They can't get jobs.
While the IOM project is helping to expand the range of jobs, Malawi officials say they are also founding community, technical, and training colleges across the country. Their success will be measured by the number of Malawians who stay in the country or return home to make a living. Lamek Masina for VOA News, Blantyre.
Algeria officially has a new president. Abdel-Kader Tebboune was sworn in Thursday after winning an election last week that was dismissed by protesters as an attempt by the country's political elite to retain power. Tebboune, a former prime minister, won 58% of the vote, but the voting was boycotted by those who for 10 months rallied for political reforms. Those demonstrations helped force longtime leader Abdelaziz Bouteflika from power in April and have not been slowed by the selection of a new leader. Tebboune has appealed to protesters, promising to fight corruption and to set himself apart as an independent, even though he belongs to the country's largest political party. Airline manufacturing giant Boeing says it will suspend production of its 737 MAX jetliner in January. Industry regulators have made it clear they will not approve the jet's return to service by the end of 2019. VOA correspondent Mariama Diallo explains the potential impact of the move.
The move to suspend production of its best-selling 737 MAX came days after the head of the Federal Aviation Administration said no to recertification of the jetliner until possibly sometime next year. That news raised concerns for some workers right before the holidays.
Merry Christmas, right?
For now, the company says there would be no layoffs of its 12,000 employees during the production freeze. Meanwhile, suspending production of a commercial aircraft will have a major impact on multiple levels, analysts say.
Suspending production of a commercial aircraft, and we don't know how long that would be, is really going to create some chaos for the airlines that are involved in this, as well as the 600 or so companies that are part of the 737 MAX supply chain and Boeing itself. It's going to have substantial impact on the U.S. economy. And as it already has, I think will affect our trade deficit.
Boeing officials say they decided to stop production, in part because the FAA declined to certify the aircraft at least until 2020. The 737 MAX had been grounded since March after two separate fatal crashes, one in Indonesia and another one in Ethiopia, that killed nearly 350 people.
Boeing made a lot of missteps, starting with the design of the airplane, and there was some early signals that it needed some fixes, and those were missed by lots of people.
Aviation expert Joe Schweiderman says for Boeing, this is going to be a tough juggling act.
This is a core of their operation, the 737 MAX, and you have lots of workers who are trained to do one thing and have them do another thing now. As you try to figure out when you're going to start, it's going to take some fancy footwork.
CEO Dennis Muilenburg had his chairmanship stripped from him because of questionable decisions he made ahead of the two crashes. He also testified before Congress about both incidences.
And I want to convey our absolute commitment to safety, our commitment to learning, our commitment to rebuilding the public's confidence in what we do, and to preventing accidents from like this from ever happening again.
But critics say he's been slow to accept blame for software failures that safety inspectors say contributed to both crashes. Mariama Diallo, VOA News, Washington.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. Thank you so much for joining us again. And from all of us here in Washington, have a good evening.